Alright everybody, welcome back! So we are back here today in what is fast becoming my favorite high tier BR in jets, 11.7. Now many of y'all might remember I recently did a video on the F-14A, which is also at 11.7, and one of the things I touched on there was the Matchmaker. And that hasn't changed at all. If anything, the EJ Kai might have a little bit of a better Matchmaker than the F-14. I only got one up tier to 12.3 during my entire gaming session getting the footage, and I actually got 3 or 4 down tiers to 10.7, which is a lot more than I got whenever I was trying to do the F-14. And where does that leave us? Probably about 80% of my games were 11.0, 12.0 matches, and the vast majority of those vehicles are going to be 11.0 and 11.3, and to be honest, a lot of them are going to be premium players, just like this F4S in front of me. And yeah, a lot of them have no idea what they're doing, and so they will just fly in a basically straight line and pop some flares, and then wonder why this barrel has connected. Sure, you are still able to fight stuff like the F-16 and the MiG-29 that will beat you in basically every metric, but because probably 90% of your games are going to be those 11.0, 12.0 matches, you can only fight up to 4 of them, and there is a very good possibility that they will be going for someone else instead of you. After all, there are 16 players for them to go after. This basically just lets you go free most of the time, and so long as you don't get into a dogfight with an F-16 or a MiG-29, the EJ Kai is pretty competitive, weapons-wise at least. You have a very nice kit for the battle rating. You have 4 AIM-9Ls and 4 AIM-7Fs. Basically the same kit as something like the F-16 ADF or MLU, except you get an extra 2 Sparrows. Along with the very similar kit, you do actually get the F-16 radar as well, and this radar is very, very good for 11.7. Gaijin also went ahead and actually fixed my one gripe with the F-16's radar recently. I'm not 100% sure when, but it can now switch lock types from pulse Doppler to normal pulse or normal track, whatever you want to call it, while maintaining lock, which means that if someone's notching you, you can just switch to normal pulse mode and keep guiding a lot of the time. This one feature used to be why I preferred the F-14's radar over the F-16's, but now the F-16 has it as well. There's like really no downside to it, minus the TWS, but you don't get AMRAAMs or anything like that anyway, so it's not a major deal. Speaking of the missiles though, Sparrows, they've been hit or miss lately. They seem to do better at this BR because a lot of people don't know what they're doing, but they still whiff a ton of shots just randomly. I don't really know exactly what's going on. I've had stuff where I have a solid red lock and it just flies off into the nether. I've had others where the enemy aircraft does a small roll to one side or the other and it just completely misses for no apparent reason. And with an aircraft that's as reliant on its missiles as something like the Phantom, especially whenever it's fighting 4th gens, that can really cripple it. Now, as long as the missiles do work, the EJ Kai is in a very good position because it has, as far as I'm aware, the strongest kit at 11.7, and that still holds up very well even in the 12.0 matches. Though, of course, when you're fighting MiG-29s, the R27ER will completely trounce on this thing if you do decide to take it high. So going back to that Phantom agility there for a second, there is one big difference between the EJ Kai and other Phantoms that I covered on my channel, like the normal F-4E or the current S2000. The Japanese didn't buy the Agile Eagle kit, which means that the EJ Kai is a hard-wing Phantom. For those of y'all who don't know what Agile Eagle is, if you've ever flown the F-4E, those slats that pop out on the front of the wings whenever you pull, that is the Agile Eagle kit, and basically what it does is it both drastically increases the amount of AOA that the aircraft can pull, and it also increases its instant turn. It doesn't help with sustained turn too much, but we don't really have super long rate fights in War Thunder, so for the purposes of normal air RB, the EJ Kai is just going to be a downgrade flight performance-wise over something like the F-4E. The way that I personally deal with this is by running very light on fuel. I run 20 minutes max on my Phantoms, and if I am on an EC map, I'll just go ahead and go one step up on my throttle and go into first stage afterburner to conserve fuel. Once you get the Phantom below around 8 minutes of gas, even the non-Agile Eagle ones turn into a much more competitive dogfighter. And so you can run this thing against stuff like F-14s and the like and somewhat be able to keep up so long as you're at a much lower fuel state than they are. It does come with some downsides, of course, and I have run out of gas once or twice whenever I was fighting somebody, but it's the only real way that I found to keep this thing somewhat competitive flight performance-wise, considering the matchmaker that it's in. It is still better off than something like the F-4J, for example, especially the F-4J UK, because at least it has an internal gun. The F-4J and the F-4J UK, if you want to bring a gun, you have to bring that heavy gun pod. And especially for the F-4 Junk, that thing has the double whammy of being both a hard-wing Phantom and having the heaviest gun pod that you can carry on a Phantom. You do, of course, get a radar lead indicator. I wouldn't really recommend relying on it too much. It can be helpful sometimes, but personally I found that it's more hassle than it's worth. And of course, the AIM-9L is still very competitive in a dogfight, so if you are dealing with something that's a lot more agile than you are, you can try and throw an AIM-9L at them from close range rear aspect. Because even though the AIM-9L is easier to flare now than it used to be, the rise time changes, which affects how long it takes our flares to heat up, means that if you fire an AIM-9L from usually within around a kilometer rear aspect, most planes can't flare it. If it has large caliber countermeasures like the MiG-23 or MiG-27, those can typically flare AIM-9Ls, but most stuff like all the F-4S players that you're fighting aren't really going to be able to flare it. One thing to note is that the EJ Kai is able to use the AAM-3. Now, do I think it's going to get it, and do I think it should get it? No, definitely not. I'm not a fan of slapping better and better missiles onto old airframes, and I don't think that the EJ Kai would benefit from getting a higher BR, which the AAM-3 would require, as it's basically just a better AIM-9M, compared to just sitting at 11.7 with the Sparrows and the AIM-9Ls, where it's actually pretty strong. By the way, that's also assuming that Gaijin leaves the AAM-3 as just a better AIM-9M, because they actually just passed a bug report that might give it an imaging seeker or a dual-band optical guidance system. At minimum, that would mean that we would get something like a Stinger seeker head on it, which would be basically unflareable in terms of ARB. Gaijin may have already been aware of this, and they just had to go ahead and add it early, kind of like the Magic 2, and they're going to buff it later on. And if that's the case, then this definitely has no place being on a Phantom. That'd be like slapping an AIM-9X on the F-4E and trying to move it up in BR. It's just not worth it. Just leave it at the lower BR with the current stuff. Overall, though, I have to say I'm really happy with how the EJ Kai is sitting at the moment. I've always been a fan of this aircraft ever since it came out way back in the day. I love modified stuff in general. So it being pretty good again is really nice to see. Hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, go ahead and like, comment, subscribe, all that good stuff, and I'll catch y'all next time. So, peace, y'all.